In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, one weak ship turned toward a monster. Everyone on board knew the truth. They were not going to come back. But they still went forward, because if they didn't, thousands would die. The ocean was restless that night, not loud or violent, but deeply uneasy. As if something hidden beneath the darkness was watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Cold winds slicing across the North Atlantic, while heavy waves rolled slowly like the breathing of something alive. And in the middle of that endless black expanse, a convoy of ships pushed forward. Dozens of slow and vulnerable vessels carrying supplies that meant survival for Britain, food, fuel, and hope, moving together through dangerous waters where one mistake could mean total destruction. And at the center of this formation sailed HMS Jervis Bay, a ship that was never meant for war. Once a peaceful passenger liner, but now turned into an armed merchant cruiser, carrying old guns that were never designed to face a real enemy. Yet still standing as the only shield between the convoy and whatever danger might emerge from the darkness. On the bridge stood Captain Edward Fegen, calm and focused, his eyes scanning the horizon where nothing could be clearly seen, only shadows stretching endlessly in every direction, the kind of silence that makes even experienced sailors uncomfortable. And then, suddenly, that silence was broken by a voice cutting through the tension. Unidentified ship spotted, and in that single moment, everything changed. The air itself seemed to freeze as every man on the bridge realized that this was not routine anymore. This was danger, real danger, and without hesitation, Fegen gave the order to turn toward the unknown contact, a decision that might have seemed strange to some because instinct says to run from danger. But Fegen understood something deeper. If the threat reached the convoy, none of them would escape. A signal was sent across the dark ocean, a challenge code flashing through the night. A simple test that would reveal whether the approaching ship was friend or enemy. And for a few seconds, there was nothing. Only the sound of waves and the distant hum of engines. But then a reply came back, identical, perfect, too perfect. And that was the moment when the truth became clear. No friendly ship would answer like that. This was deception. This was the enemy. And a cold realization spread across the bridge as men exchanged silent glances, knowing exactly what they were facing without needing to say it out loud. Fegen raised his binoculars and focused on the distant silhouette, a dark shape slowly becoming clearer against the faint horizon. And as details began to emerge, his blood ran cold, because this was no ordinary raider. This was something far more dangerous, a German pocket battleship, the HMS Admiral Scheer, a ship built for destruction, carrying massive guns capable of tearing apart multiple ships within minutes, a floating fortress that completely outmatched anything in the convoy, and especially Jervis Bay, which stood no real chance in a direct fight. And for a brief moment, the reality of the situation hung heavily in the air, because everyone knew what this meant. There was no victory here, no scenario where Jervis Bay could defeat such an enemy, but there was still one thing they could do, one desperate option that could change everything, and that was time. If they could delay the enemy even for a few minutes, the convoy might scatter and escape into the darkness. And in that moment, Captain Fegen made a decision that would define everything that followed. A decision not for survival, but for sacrifice. He ordered the convoy to break formation, to release smoke, to run as fast as possible and disappear into the night, while Jervis Bay would turn and face the enemy alone. drawing all attention toward itself, a single ship choosing to stand against overwhelming power so that others might live. Flares shot into the sky, burning bright red against the darkness, signaling the convoy to scatter. And immediately the peaceful formation broke into chaos as ships turned hard to starboard, engines pushed to their limits, crews shouting commands as they tried to avoid colliding with one another in the confusion. While thick clouds of smoke began to spread across the ocean, creating a massive gray wall that slowly swallowed the convoy, hiding them from sight, and within seconds, the ships that had been clearly visible were gone, replaced by nothing but shifting shadows and drifting smoke. And then Jervis Bay turned, not away from danger, but directly toward it. Engines roared as the ship accelerated, moving out of the smoke and into open water, presenting itself as the only visible target, a deliberate act designed to draw the enemy's fire. And in the distance, Admiral Scheer continued forward, its massive guns already aligning for the first attack, its commander observing the situation with calculated focus, initially expecting easy prey, a convoy of defenseless merchant ships. But now something unexpected was happening. One of the ships was charging toward them. Not fleeing, not hiding, but advancing, and that single act changed everything. On board Jervis Bay, the crew moved quickly to their battle stations, alarms ringing across the ship as men prepared for what they knew would be a one-sided fight. And yet there was no panic, only determination, because they understood their role in this moment. They were not here to win, they were here to hold the line, to stand between destruction and survival. And even though their guns were smaller, their range shorter, and their chances almost non-existent, they would fire every round they had, because every second they stayed alive meant another second for the convoy to escape. Far across the water, Admiral Scheer's guns fired. A deep thunder rolled across the ocean. Moments later, massive shells screamed through the air, and then the sea exploded. Columns of water rose violently around Jervis Bay as the first shots landed. Not yet hitting, but dangerously close, the German gunners adjusting their aim with deadly precision, each salvo getting closer than the last. And on the deck, sailors watched the towering walls of water crash back down, knowing that it was only a matter of time before those shells found their mark. And still, the ship kept moving forward. Still, the guns prepared to fire. Still, the crew held their positions as the distance between hunter and target closed rapidly, bringing them closer and closer to the moment where everything would change forever.
The distance between the two ships was closing fast, and with every passing second, the tension grew heavier, pressing down on every man aboard HMS Jervis Bay as the thunder of distant guns echoed across the ocean, a deep and terrifying sound that seemed to shake the very air itself. And then, without warning, the next salvo came, louder, closer, more precise, the shells screaming through the sky before crashing violently into the sea around the ship, sending massive towers of water rising high above the deck, drenching everything in freezing spray. And in that moment, every man understood that the enemy had found their range. "Hold steady," the order came, calm but firm, even as death closed in from every direction, and the gunners prepared their weapons, knowing full well that their small guns could barely reach the enemy. But still, they worked with speed and discipline, loading shells, adjusting angles, waiting for the command that would allow them to fire back, not because it would destroy the enemy, but because it would keep them focused, keep them engaged, keep them from turning their full attention toward the escaping convoy hidden behind the wall of smoke. Far across the dark water, Admiral Scheer adjusted its course slightly, its massive guns now perfectly aligned, its crew experienced and efficient, each man performing his role with deadly precision. And when the next command was given,
The ship unleashed another devastating salvo, the roar so powerful it seemed to tear through the night itself. And this time, the shells did not fall short. They hit. The impact was catastrophic, a violent explosion tearing through the upper structure of Jervis Bay, sending shards of metal, wood, and fire flying in every direction. The bridge shattering under the force as flames erupted instantly, smoke pouring into the air, and for a brief moment, everything became chaos. Men thrown from their positions, the ship trembling under the shock, alarms ringing, voices shouting through the confusion as the reality of the battle became brutally clear. Captain Fegen was thrown to the ground, the world spinning around him as pain surged through his body. Sharp and overwhelming, and as he tried to push himself up, he realized something was terribly wrong. His arm was gone, torn away in the blast, and yet even in that moment, even as blood flowed and the pain threatened to consume him, he did not stop. He did not give in. Instead, he forced himself to stand, gripping on to another sailor for support, his mind focused on one thing and one thing only, the mission. The ship was burning now. Flames spread rapidly across the deck, smoke thick and choking, turning the air into something almost impossible to breathe. And yet the crew did not abandon their posts. They moved through the chaos with determination. Firefighting teams rushing forward with hoses, trying desperately to control the spreading inferno, while the gunners remained where they were, continuing to load and fire, refusing to stop even as the ship around them began to fall apart. "Keep firing!" The order came again, and it was obeyed without hesitation because every shot mattered. Every second mattered, and somewhere beyond the smoke, the convoy was escaping, slipping away into the darkness, and that alone made everything worth it. Another salvo came, and another, each one closer than the last, each one more destructive. The superstructure of the ship began to collapse under repeated impacts, metal twisting, wood splintering, flames rising higher with every explosion, and then another direct hit struck, sending a shockwave through the deck that knocked men off their feet, the sound deafening, the force unstoppable, and still the ship continued forward, still refusing to turn away. Somewhere on the deck, a sailor looked up and saw the white ensign falling, torn away by the blast, drifting down through smoke and fire, and for a moment it felt like everything was ending. Like the symbol of their nation itself was being destroyed. But then, without hesitation, another man climbed upward through the wreckage, risking his life with every step, and secured a new flag in its place, raising it high above the burning ship. And when the crew saw it, a cheer rose through the chaos, a defiant sound that refused to be silenced. On Admiral Scheer, Captain Cranky watched the scene unfold, observing the burning ship that still refused to retreat, still blocking his path, still firing its weak guns despite being hopelessly outmatched. And there was something about it that he could not ignore, something that demanded attention, because this was not normal, this was not expected. This was resistance beyond reason, and yet it was real, and it was slowing him down. Time was passing, and time was exactly what Jervis Bay was trying to steal. Back on the shattered deck, the situation grew worse with every passing moment. Explosions continuing to rip through the ship, fire spreading uncontrollably, the structure weakening as water began to enter through damaged sections. And still, Captain Fegen pushed forward, his body barely holding together as he made his way toward the rear control position, knowing that if he could just reach it, he might still be able to steer the ship, still be able to keep it between the enemy and the convoy, still be able to buy a little more time. Around him, men continued to fight, some injured, some exhausted, but none willing to give up because they understood what was at stake. They understood that their survival was no longer the priority. The convoy was, and as long as they could keep the enemy focused on them, as long as they could remain a threat, no matter how small, they were doing their duty. Another explosion rocked the ship, stronger than the last, closer than before. The deck beneath their feet trembled violently, and for a moment it felt as though the entire vessel might break apart. And then through the smoke and fire came another devastating strike, hitting near the area Fegen was trying to reach. A massive blast that consumed everything in its path, flames erupting outward, debris scattering in every direction, and when the smoke began to clear, the path ahead was gone. Where Fegen was moving, there was nothing but destruction. The ship was no longer just damaged, it was dying. And yet, even now, even at the edge of complete destruction, the guns of Jervis Bay continued to fire into the darkness.
The ship could not hold any longer. The damage had gone too far. Flames tearing through what remained of the structure, while water forced its way inside from below. And slowly, almost unwillingly, HMS Jervis Bay began to lose its fight against the ocean, the once proud ship now trembling under the weight of destruction. Yet even in those final moments, there was no panic, only the harsh realization that this was the end. And somewhere through the smoke, a single order finally cut through the chaos. Abandoned ship. The word spread quickly, carried from one man to another as sailors began preparing to leave, some injured, some barely able to stand, but all moving with urgency as the deck tilted beneath their feet. Lifeboats already being lowered into the freezing Atlantic, ropes creaking, metal groaning, and the sound of fire still raging behind them as they made their way toward whatever chance of survival remained. And among them was able seaman Sam Patience, dazed, wounded, struggling to stay conscious as the world around him seemed to blur into noise and motion. The explosions had taken their toll on him, his body weak, his senses fading in and out, and as he looked around, he realized something terrifying. The lifeboats were already leaving, one after another disappearing into the darkness, filled with men who had managed to reach them in time, and suddenly he was alone, standing on a ship that was moments away from sinking, with no clear path to safety, no easy way out, and the cold reality of the situation hit him harder than anything before. He could not swim. The ocean below was black, endless, freezing, and jumping into it felt less like escape and more like surrender. And yet staying on the ship meant certain death. And as the deck shifted again beneath him, tilting further as water rushed inside, he knew he had no choice. He had to get off. He had to try, even if it meant facing the terror of the unknown. Then he saw it. A life buoy. Small, simple, but it meant everything. With what little strength he had left, he forced himself forward, each step heavy, painful, as if his body was resisting the effort. And when he reached the buoy, he grabbed it, pulling desperately, but it would not come free.
I can't move it. It's stuck.
Stuck in place, as if even this last chance was slipping away, and panic began to rise, sharp and overwhelming, as he pulled again, harder this time, his hands shaking, his breathing broken, the ship beneath him groaning louder as it continued to sink. "Come on!" The words escaped his lips like a whisper, barely audible over the chaos, and with one final effort, he pulled with everything he had left, and this time the buoy came loose, suddenly and completely, nearly throwing him off balance. And without giving himself time to think, without allowing fear to take over again, he turned and jumped.
The impact with the water was brutal, the cold hitting him like a shock that stole the air from his lungs, his body reacting instantly as he struggled to stay afloat, grabbing onto the buoy as waves pushed him up and down, the burning pain in his injuries mixing with the freezing ocean around him, and for a moment he thought he might not make it, that this was where it would end, alone in the darkness, swallowed by the sea. But he kept fighting. He had to. Around him, the wreck of Jervis Bay continued its final descent, the once mighty ship now disappearing slowly beneath the surface, flames flickering one last time before being consumed by the ocean. And in that haunting moment, the white ensign could still be seen, raised high, even as everything else was lost, standing as a final symbol of defiance, of sacrifice, of a crew that refused to surrender. Then it was gone. Only darkness remained, and the cold, and the silence. Sam floated in that silence, his body shaking uncontrollably as the freezing water drained his strength with every passing second, his mind drifting between awareness and exhaustion. And he had no idea where to go, no direction, no clear hope, only the distant sounds of the ocean and the fading echoes of battle somewhere far away, because the battle was not over. In the distance, flashes of light still cut through the darkness as Admiral Scheer continued its hunt, its guns firing at other merchant ships that had not yet escaped, explosions lighting up the horizon briefly before fading back into black, a deadly game of pursuit playing out in the night. And yet even the powerful warship was beginning to feel the effects of time lost, the delay caused by Jervis Bay, forcing it to search blindly in the dark, wasting ammunition, losing its advantage. On board the German ship, Captain Cranky watched the situation unfold with growing frustration. The convoy no longer an easy target, but scattered and hidden, the darkness now working against him. And after a long moment of consideration, he made a decision, one that marked the end of the hunt for that night. Break off the attack. The words were simple, but they carried weight. And slowly, the great battleship turned away, disappearing into the vast emptiness of the ocean, leaving behind only silence and scattered survivors. Hours passed, cold, endless hours. Sam could feel his strength fading, his movements slower, weaker, his body struggling to hold on as the freezing water continued to drain what little energy he had left. And just when it seemed like there was nothing more he could do, when the darkness felt like it was closing in completely, he saw something, a shape, faint, moving, and then voices,
over here.
Real voices, men calling out across the water, searching, hoping, and with the last of his strength, Sam moved toward them, pushing through the waves, holding on to the buoy as if it was the only thing keeping him alive. And when he finally reached the lifeboat, hands reached out, pulling him up, dragging him out of the freezing ocean and into safety. And as he collapsed onto the floor of the boat, exhausted beyond words, he knew he had survived. But many had not. The men sat together in silence, shivering, exhausted, watching the empty ocean where their ship had once been. And in the distance, the battle had faded completely, leaving behind nothing but darkness and memory. And for a long time, no one spoke, because there were no words that could truly capture what had just happened. Then, as dawn slowly approached, something unexpected appeared on the horizon, lights cutting through the early morning gloom, a ship approaching, and at first there was fear, uncertainty, the question of whether this was friend or enemy. But as it came closer, the truth became clear. It was not German, it was neutral. The Swedish freighter Sturahome, and as it reached the survivors, its crew wasted no time, pulling the freezing men aboard, offering warmth, safety, and something they had almost lost completely: hope. Out of the entire crew of HMS Jervis Bay, only a small number survived. But their sacrifice had changed everything. Because of them, because of one ship that refused to run. Almost the entire convoy escaped, and Britain survived another day. Captain Edward Fegen did not live to see the outcome of his decision, but his actions echoed far beyond that night, earning him the Victoria Cross, one of the highest honors for bravery, a recognition not just of courage, but of something far greater: sacrifice, duty, and the choice to stand when standing meant certain death. And even now, long after the war has ended, the story of HMS Jervis Bay remains, not as a tale of victory, but as a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories are not about winning battles, but about saving others.